Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Becky Scherr.
And I'm Michael Brodkorb.
We are continuing on with our coverage of the ever-evolving presidential campaign. This week, we are going to stay on the left side of the aisle as we break down all things Kamala Harris and her pending running mate. We are going to kick off the show with Will Davis to discuss the chatter around Minnesota Governor Tim Walz being on the shortlist. Will is a political consultant with ARC Initiatives, a firm based in Washington, D.C. that specializes in building, managing, and advising public affairs and political campaigns with deep knowledge of the issue and with the know-how to how to bend it steeply as possible to achieve results. Will previously served as the research director for the Minnesota DFL and joined the podcast when we did a crossover episode with the DFL debrief in early 2023. We are excited to chat with Will to break down Walz's chances in the Veep stakes. We will get into what makes Walz attractive to the Harris campaign and how a former teacher from Minnesota could play on the national stage. And then you're in for a treat. Today's show brings a rare double interview. After we chat with Will about Walz, we will be joined by Senator Erin Maye Quade, who represents Senate District 56. The senator joined us just a little over a year ago, and we are excited to have her back as well. With Senator Erin Maye Quade, we will discuss the overall enthusiasm search within the Democratic Party. And we will break down how the musical chairs for nominee has reinvigorated the party and what that may mean up and down the ballot. We will be back later this week to get into Trump's visit to Minnesota over the weekend and some of the camps we are seeing on the right. Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show. We are excited to welcome Will Davis back to the episode. And today we are focused on all things Governor Walz. Now, Will, you spent a good number of years, just short of a decade, with the Minnesota DFL. You've seen Governor Walz went from Congressman Walz to Governor Walz. We are now hearing him speculated on the short list and potentially a short list of 5 or maybe even a short list of 3 potential running mates for Kamala Harris and the Democratic ticket. Tell us your take on this. What are you hearing? What are you feeling? You love Governor Walz, right? Are we excited about this prospect?
Yeah, of course. And this is actually something I've been making the case for around the DFL bubble anyway. Actually, if you go back about a week and a half, Bovada had gambling odds for who would be the VP. At that point, Walz was plus 500. And I would say within a week, that has shot up to, he was number 1 or 2 on that list with the best odds. And I was telling people back then that you should put money on that. That's actually a very good bet. Because I think when you break it down, even one by one with the other candidates, I think he offers the best argument across the board on all the different box checks that they're looking for. I really think he's really a great candidate for this.
And so we see a lot. We were talking on our last week's episode about how some of these other names that are being floated around. We have Pennsylvania, we have Arizona, we have Michigan, although we know that she's now chairing the campaign. So we know that those are top battleground states that bring something to the political map that Minnesota doesn't necessarily, though the Trump campaign has said that Minnesota is, in their top tiered states this time around. What would you say to those saying that Governor Walz doesn't bring enough to the table when it comes to an electoral college benefit, as somebody like Shapiro or Kelly does?
Sure. I think you can look at it as there's 7 different pieces. And one of those pieces is what they bring to the table, like as far as the electoral college. And Mark Kelly being in Arizona obviously is a selling point, but also Mark Kelly represents a very difficult Democrat won Senate seat. And while we would have it for 2 more years, I don't think anyone has the interest in fighting that fight all over again. We got lucky. We went up against Kari Lake, and that was tough enough. And I think Mark Kelly's done a great job and is a great candidate. He's an astronaut, but I think that is just, and if you remember when Joe Biden became president, U.S. senators in the cabinet was off the table, not an option. And I think that's going to be the working case again. It's just a really difficult fight to make. I think Shapiro, is the only other one in regards to Walz that makes that argument. Obviously, Pennsylvania is a big place, but I think Minnesota is, obviously we've been dominating for the last decade, but I think Minnesota is a lot more purple than I think people realize. And I think that's not because of the Republicans. And the Republicans really think that they're making inroads, but As far as I see it, Donald Trump has not made any improvements upon Republican candidates of the past. Where he almost won in 16 was due to third party. I think the presidential election in Minnesota goes with how Democrats feel about that top of the ticket. Obviously, there was a real enthusiasm gap in 16 for us, and the third party candidates got a record number of votes. And I will say the last few months have been pretty dark around DFL bubble. I think we all saw what happened on the debate. And I think just generally, we just we're not seeing a lot of enthusiasm, rightly or wrongly. I don't think that's an indictment on Joe Biden. I think people picked him in the first place because they thought he could beat Trump. And I think they were not going with Biden because they didn't think it. I think Kamala Harris is someone that they are fired up about. And I think Tim Walz does nothing to hurt that. And I think he brings with him a story of Minnesota that will be a huge weapon on the campaign trail.
Will, make the case from your perspective, going through bullets, going through your points, why you think Walz is hands down the best pick for VP.
George Soros sent me some talking points here, so let me go through this.
Oh, I'm sure he did.
I was on mute, but I got a good.
That was fantastic.
No, but for real. Okay, so I'm going to go through like the 7 biggest considerations, I think, and I'll tell you why he checks all these boxes.
Are these 7 points less than the 13 keys of the presidency? Because I've been reading the 13 keys of I've been reading that for years, but so keep going then. Your 7 points. Go ahead.
My 7 points. It obviously has a lot more sway in mine than that book, but I think obviously you could just start off male versus female. All female ticket is just not going to happen right now. I think rightly or wrongly, I don't think the public is ready for that. We had a hard enough time because Hillary was a woman in 16, quite frankly. I think there was a lot of attention on things that were irrelevant when it comes to her looks and those kind of things. And having that, I just think that's going to be a tough sell. And I just think politically that they just don't want to have to fight that fight. I think Midwest versus Coast. So when we talk about Gavin Newsom and we talk about some of these folks on the East Coast, I think they want to have a balanced ticket. And Roy Cooper is another one. And while you don't think of North Carolina as a coast, it also isn't very Midwest. And there's so much in the Midwest that we need to hold on to. And I think Tim Walz is better at that than almost any of those folks. You talk about experience. He's got congressional and executive experience. He knows how to navigate in DC. He knows how to help run a state. I think Mark Kelly doesn't have that. Shapiro doesn't have. That's a kind of a unique one amongst the list of folks. I think story and background is a big one. I think whether you like it or not, he's got a great bio. He's from small town America. He is a teacher, a high school teacher, a high school football coach. We all know all of it, National Guard, all that stuff. And it's a great story. And I think that's very sellable. The other part about experience the story is what isn't in his story. There's very little oppo, as you folks know, in this last election. There wasn't a whole lot to pull out. He doesn't have skeletons in the closet. There's no bad stuff. There's no issues with unions, with labor. There's no issues environment. It's just all of it is he handles it all well. There's no deep, dark oppo stuff. It just doesn't exist. He's just is who he is. How they do on TV, obviously, is a big thing. You can go on TV and take a couple sips of your water at weird times or whatever Bobby Jindal did back in the day and ruin it, right? We've all seen this last weekend. He goes on TV and he crushes it. He's always on message. He's funny, he's charming, and he looks you in the eye and he tells you what he thinks. I think, like I was saying earlier, the victories he's had here in Minnesota, school lunches, all the stuff we talk about, gun control efforts, I think paid family medical leave. He signed all these bills that to a person, if you just poll on those issues one by one and not label them as Democrat or Republican, all that stuff polls great. And it's all stuff that our voters of our party have been wanting for years, but sometimes they find Democrats, they don't come through with stuff that they promise. Tim Walz has. And also I will say he'll be the first to tell you he didn't do it by himself. Obviously the legislature played a huge role, but again, that shows how he's able to work with them and to navigate those waters. And I think, and again, what we talked about as far as states, I think having Minnesota it's not like he's from California is not really a huge pickup, right? where Kamala might be lacking. She's from California. It's not going to be a battleground state. And while Minnesota isn't a huge battleground state, it's not off the table either. Trump's been here for a reason. So,
Becky, it's all you. You got to
I love
respond.
to play. I got to poke a little bit, right? I got to play devil's advocate a little bit.
I'm sitting back.
I did.
I'm sitting back, Becky. It's all you.
You can feel free to defend. I know this is your gubernatorial candidate of choice as well. Feel free to jump in if you need to. There was an article over the weekend that did say, it was national review, so take it for what it's worth, but it did say Harris VP shortlister comes loaded with baggage. And it does go into some of Walz maybe being more liberal in the governor's mansion than he was on the campaign trail or in Congress. It talks about the Feeding the Future scandal and some other things that we've seen under the Walz administration. Now, even as a diehard Republican, I sometimes like to know that while the buck stops at Walz, it's not ultimately Walz in all of this. But what do you say to some of those? I know I was also just seeing Representative Harry Niska did a big tweet over the weekend that got a lot of response saying he is claiming to be for freedom while he seizes more and more government control, claiming to be for one Minnesota while he divides and insults. What's your what do you say to some of those folks, maybe some of those folks in the middle we talk a lot about the double haters who don't really like Biden, don't really like Trump, now maybe are going to be over. Do you think that Walz helps with some of those folks that are maybe a little bit skeptical of Kamala Harris? And what do you think about some of these articles or elected officials claiming that he is not all he's cracked up to be and does have more baggage than on its face?
Yeah, I think for instance, when they say he's too liberal, there's a lot of absurd accusations out there as far as that goes. But I think that goes back to what I was saying about the victories here. If they're calling him too liberal, it's because of the bills that were passed. And those are popular. Those are all popular bills, whether some folks like to admit it or not. Paid family leave is popular. Yes, that can be called socialism, which I find absurd. It's taking care of people. But when people are going to jump on that, school lunches, all that stuff, if that is, I think he said it, if that makes him a monster and too liberal, then go ahead and call it. Because those things are actually popular, I think, amongst the population. I think people get fed up when they expect something like that and it doesn't come through. And it's the same old politics. And Minnesota has just changed. Minnesota and Michigan, quite frankly, have been the two most progressive states, and both have been popular. So as far as that goes, I think he'd welcome that fight. I think back to Mark Dayton when he ran on a platform of raising taxes, and then he did raise taxes and he won. And if people know it's going to the right things and the things they want, they generally agree with it and they're okay with it. As far as some of the other stuff, everyone there's going to be a tax on every single candidate, fair or not. I think, like you said, the Feeding Our Future stuff, all of that stuff, that is going to come with the territory with being an executive of a state. I think you can't, and okay, what I hate is folks in my position, and I'm watching right now, and they come on and they give really canned responses, and it's always, if you think that's bad, look at the other guy. But I will say, when you're talking about a presidential ticket, that's really all it comes down to. Folks are going to sit there and they're going to look at Donald Trump and JD Vance, and they're going to look at Tim Walz and Kamala Harris, and they're going to say, what feels better? What feels safer? And maybe there were things that aren't perfect in Minnesota, but I think by and large, people aren't going to blame our governor for all of those things. And I think the stuff that comes with him is stuff that's very popular. I hate to sound like a canned talking point lib, but I really believe that. I just think when it's safer, it's what people want. And I think voters, by and large, they want the government to just run without having to worry about it. And I think here in Minnesota, that's happened and people are happy with it. I think with Donald Trump, it's chaos every other day and people get sick of it. Did I not dance around it good enough? Okay.
No, I thought you did. I thought you did great in responding to Becky's attacks. I thought you did a great job in responding to her attacks. And I'm really sorry that happened.
Job to do.
I'm really sorry that happened. I knew that she was loaded for bear, and I'm really sorry that happened.
No,
I'm just joking, man. And so if I will say, and this conversation, I'm been so excited for a couple of reasons. Number one, because of the conversations I've had with Becky on this. Becky has been, she has prepped. I've been more prepped for this because of the podcast than I ever have before, because she's been very consistent about this, and we've had really good discussions about this. Becky, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you can. We discussed the possibility of this well over a year ago, and I made the case that Walz would be a good VP pick. So I've been on this long before Will decided to join this bandwagon. I've been talking about this for quite some time. And let me give you my take why I think I think he's a good fit. I fundamentally believe he's the perfect pick. I love astronauts. I've come to that realization. I may have a little bit of a crush on anyone who's ever been an astronaut. I mean that in the most respectful and platonic way. But astronauts, I think I just would always love to be an astronaut. So my initial reaction was to say, astronaut, he's got to be to the front of the list. But the more I look at this, the more I think Walz is a great pick. And a couple of reasons why. I'll talk just about me for a second. I consider myself to be a homeless Republican, someone who doesn't who's more predisposed to vote Republican. And I certainly have over the years, much more voted for Republicans than Democrats, but I voted split ticket. And I think what makes Walz look reasonable, what's made Walz look so reasonable, has been in some ways the Republican candidates that he's faced and the opposition that he's faced. He's been able to stake out, I think, a couple of things. I think he's staked out. First of all, Walz is a winner. He's won every time he's ran for office. He's been successful, very successful at that. He obviously politics is about timing. He challenged an incumbent congressman in the first congressional district, was able to win in that race in very tough circumstances when he faced reelection and other opportunities. He won a district that Republicans had won for president over the years. So Walz has an ability to win. Now, let me say a couple of things. I do not believe that there's any evidence that shows that people directly vote for president based on who the VP is. I do believe that it helps complete the picture. Let me give you a perfect example. I think the reason why Dick Cheney was picked in 2000 was to help out George W. Bush. I think that there was a belief that George W. Bush was there was a credibility gap. And I think that one of the advantages of having Cheney on the ticket was that there was, in essence, it communicated that there was at least an adult in the room in some ways. And I say that as someone who's a big fan of 43. And if Dick Cheney were to announce he was running for president, I would quit all my jobs and I would door knock till my knuckles bled because I'm such a fan of Dick Cheney. But I think he stabilized. I'm sorry, your mic is muted, but I wasn't going to let you speak up anyways. And so Cheney is, I think, a good example of how the VP can complement the ticket and how it can help support the ticket in some ways. So what do I think Walz does? I think Walz helps stabilize some concerns about issues that people might have with Vice President Harris on some of her issues, on some of where she stands. I think she complements the ticket. And I think it brings, I think gender balance is important. I agree with you. And I think we've discussed this before. I do wish we were at a point in this country where it wouldn't be an issue if there were two women running on the ticket, but it's just the reality of where we're at, I think. And I think there'd be pluses and minuses in adding Gretchen Whitmer or another female as a running mate. But I'm a big advocate of there being balance on the ticket. I think it's a mistake that the Trump campaign made in picking JD Vance, who I'm now calling just disastrous Vance, as what JD stands for. I've also been using DJ Vance is on the flip side, but I'm going to start going with just disastrous to refer to Vance. And so I think Walz brings that in. I think Walz also has an ability to communicate issues in a way that connects with people. And I think he has the story that's been told, the narrative of Walz's background, I think is a compelling narrative that I think brings a lot of energy and enthusiasm. He also, I think, is aided by the fact, and this I think is very interesting, and this is where I think Democrats do a better job than Republicans. When Tim Pawlenty ran for president in 2012, he was challenged by Michelle Bachmann. There were two Minnesotans running at the same time. Republicans, I don't think, did a good job of supporting Tim Pawlenty when he ran for president. And what's so amazing, I think, is how unified the Democratic Party is in this state to Walz, in essence, being the VP pick. The Democrats, I think, do such a better job of supporting their candidates, boosting their candidates, and supporting them in this discussion. And I think, as someone who was talking about this hypothetical scenario a year or so ago, if not longer, about the credibility as Walz as a nation, as a ticket, as someone who could be on a national ticket, I the more I see analysis and discussion, the more I think Walz is should be near the top of the list, if not the top pick that should be considered right now. I think he's that strong of a candidate to do this. And I think one of the undervalued reasons is he has both executive experience and legislative experience working in Congress. Now, the vice president does, she served in the Senate, but there is a lot of executive and legislative experience between the both of them.
Mhm.
And I think that makes for a real powerful ticket.
If I can add one more thing to add to that, and something I said earlier, all of those legislative wins were with a 1-seat Senate majority. Think about all the difficulty we've had passing laws because of 1 seat in the Senate or 2 seats in the Senate. The Joe Manchins of the world or the Kirsten Sinemas, right? Tim Walz has also navigated those waters and has come out successfully. I think that's a huge selling point.
So I completely agree. And I agree on a lot of things. I want to take out that completely. I do believe that for this ticket, having a strong, stable voice, somebody who people can look at and think that this is going to be that this presidency under a Harris ticket would have some more stability to it. I do think that
Great.
she's
Let's
still.
end the show. Let's end the show right there. Thank you guys both for coming on. It was great to have you on. And the breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will be back next.
I personally think that person, though, is Senator Kelly from Arizona. I do think he brings a little bit more to the electoral map or to the electoral calculation on the Harris side. I think that he has a lot of the similar makings of a Governor Walz, and he has that ability to come in and give people a little reassurance if they might be feeling a little skeptical about President Kamala Harris. And so I understand what you guys are saying. I just need it on the record that I do think that Senator Kelly is the top pick, that I expect to see it go down. Michael, you, and then I have a question.
I was going to ask you about the discussion, and I think we've had it before, about Harris picking a female. Can I get your perspective? Because we've touched on that before, Becky. Your take on that?
Yeah, I think I tend to agree with you. I think it's a lot. I think there are still a lot of people in the world, both sides of the aisle, a variety of genders, who don't believe that two women, that it's the strongest ticket, that it's the strongest, maybe emotionally stable. I think there's a lot of people that still look at women in elected office and have all sorts of preconceived notions of what it means for a woman to lead if they're able to do so without crying, if they're able to do so at certain times of the month. It's crazy what really comes into conversations when we're looking at women leaders in this world at all, in corporate America and political America and everything in between. And I just really, truly don't see it. I think that there are some folks in this world, that Democrats in this case, that would maybe be hesitant on casting their ballot to Kamala Harris. I do think it's less than maybe the press and folks want us to believe. I do think we're ready for a woman president. I do
I would
think
agree.
that is capable, or that women are capable of having that, and men and women alike are capable of casting their ballots to have the most amount of votes go towards a woman. So
Yep.
I don't think that means a woman at the top of the ticket by any means says we're going to have millions of folks stay home, not cast their ballot because it's a woman. But I do think I like balance on every ticket. I like a man-woman ticket. I like different rural city. I like if we can have different diversities of religion or ethnicity. I think that all sorts of diverse, this is something we're striving for in corporate boardrooms. I think that this is having somebody on these tickets that folks of different backgrounds can relate to is the top key, right? So, like you guys have talked about, we have West Coast, we have Minnesota, we have a prosecutor, we have a teacher. I mean, having that balance and having something that voters can really pick out from one of the candidates that they relate to or something of that, I think is instrumental. To be perfectly honest, while I do think that Trump still, in my mind, we can chat about another time, I do think Trump still comes out on top. It is disappointing to me that I don't feel like we have that diversity on the ticket for the Republicans.
Yeah. Trump and JD Vance, that anyone opposing them is going to be in a slugfight. It's going to be personal attacks. It's going to be vicious. Actually, by the way, do you both think Vance is going to get through this, or Trump is going to drop him and pick somebody? I think that's on the table, by the way.
We were just talking about that at lunch. I don't know that I don't know that his ego would allow him to admit that he was wrong about this choice. I think that at the end of the day, again, not being the biggest Trump supporter here, I think that he's always willing to fall back on the election was stolen from me if he loses versus saying, I made a mistake. This isn't the heir apparent to the MAGA future. And
Yeah.
I can't see him changing his mind.
I don't think he changes, but I do think there's a lot of substantive buyer's remorse. I think there's a lot of substantive buyer's remorse. Again, I'm not a Trump supporter, and I've gone on the record stating that I'm not a fan of JD Vance. I think Becky's summed it up that I don't think his ego would allow it, but I think just looking at the numbers, he's potentially the worst pick since Ryan Leaf.
That's a good one. Also, what does Ohio bring the Republican Party? If you're looking at that calculation, what a pick brings to the ticket as far as electorally, Ohio doesn't really do a whole lot. I think I think Ohio is more red than Minnesota is blue in a lot of ways.
Yes. And I
Yeah.
have to say, I feel really bad for saying that about Ryan Leaf. Now that I said that, I feel really bad about saying that because he doesn't deserve that. JD Vance does, but not Ryan Leaf.
Ryan Leaf does deserve. Check out his Wikipedia.
Yeah.
I do think we're going to go into later this week, tune back in. I think we'll get into I think Michael and I both are a little fired up, as millions of folks across the country, about the childless cat lady's comments in particular. And so we got lots to say there for sure.
It's so strange. I think the other thing is he was talking about
weird?
Taxing. Yeah, it's weird. That's a great term that Walz used. That's doing opposition research on some of your folks for 8 years. Weird is a really good way to describe it. I think the landscape has changed so much, and what is allowed now and what isn't allowed has changed so much in just 8 years. And I think JD Vance and Donald Trump exemplify that in every single way. I remember in 2016, or I guess it was 2018, when Jeff Johnson was running for governor. I remember we used a hit. Jeff Johnson was affiliated with the Tea Party. That was one of the hits, that the Tea Party was so extreme that it scared people away. Like, the Tea Party, give me a break. That's nothing. That is not even on the scope of what is extreme anymore in the Republican Party. And now you just look at those guys. It's bizarre. It's crazy, and it's chaos. And I just don't think people want it. And on top of that, they're vicious. And Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, is going to need someone who can handle those punches. And Tim Walz has shown last governor's race was a vicious fight too, and he handled it great. And it's going to be that kind of thing all over again. Speaking of weird,
True. Yeah. So a little context for anybody not aware, Governor Walz over the weekend in an interview with Jake Tapper commented on the Trump Vance ticket being weird, something that then the DGA pushed out and the Harris campaign started using as well. And it does seem to be playing in pretty well, but it's something that Governor Walz was a little bit of a leader on this weekend and getting some recognition for that. I do want one wrapping up here shortly, but as we talk about the electoral map and we know some of these key states that are in play and the blue wall up here, right? So do you think that while it's not in Arizona and an impact in the state itself, could Minnesota help take change over or help impact Wisconsin, Michigan? Do you see that Walz really plays in some of these other Midwestern states and can pull those over the finish line?
Yeah, I do. I think if you look at Minnesota, I think those other states reflect what we see here. What I was saying earlier, if we are offering something that people want, they are going to show up. One thing I've learned at the DFL is that we have to offer them something. And if they don't feel like we're offering anything, they're not going to show up. If we do, they will. And I think I tweeted about this. I think he's going to have this huge mallet of, this is what we do when you give us control of trifecta, more or less. The Gov, the House, the Senate. And when we have this power, we can do these good things for you. And I think Wisconsin is going to look at that. And I think Michigan, they're experiencing the same thing over in Michigan. There's been a lot of progressive policy passed. And I think he will bring that, even if he doesn't if you don't know who he is, he can talk about it with the best of them and promote it. And I think that is going to win voters over in all those states. And he knows how to talk about it to people that live in all those states.
And to that point, that's where I think that even though Walz is not an astronaut, and as I've discussed my affinity for astronauts, I do think regionally, I think Walz going to those blue wall states might give him an advantage, being that he's a part of Minnesota. He's the governor of Minnesota, where I think something that a Kelly may not be able to, I think that might be given advantage to Walz. I don't want to say it's necessarily a knock against Kelly because astronauts can speak all around the world. But I think that Walz might have some advantages just being a governor from that area.
Yeah. Yeah. We've received a ton of attention nationwide for what we've done. And I think people know about it. Yeah. Thank you, Michael. I'm number one. We've received a ton of attention. People know what's going on here and I think people are going to want to have a taste of that. Yeah. And we're less weird also.
And just to close things up, so there's only a finite number of days before the DNC convention. We know there's still some questionability between the August 7th deadline in Ohio and for ballot access and what that looks like. If you were a betting man, when do you expect that we would see or hear who the ultimate choice is to join the Harris ticket?
I think it's got to be in the next couple weeks. If I had money, I would put it on in the next couple weeks. I think people are already starting to tick off of consideration, right? I think there was a report that it's basically down to 3 folks now. I think it was Shapiro, Kelly, and Walz. And I think that says something, right? They're narrowing the field and they're going to give whoever the two the opportunity to drop out on their own accord before they pick somebody over them. And I think they got to give them a little bit of time to do those things. And I think it's going to happen shortly.
We appreciate you being with us today. I have one question I want to ask in closing, non-political. The Olympics are on. Are you watching? And what is your sport? Before you answer, I'm going to guess it's modern pentathlon. That's the sport I think you're watching probably the most. But do you watch the Olympics?
No, I don't. I'm going to watch basketball. It just doesn't do it for me. And that's coming from a 2-time DFL Olympic winner right here, all-around champion. So obviously I'm a peak athlete.
What gold medal is that?
That's DFL Olympics, DFL Office Olympics. I'm 2-time winner now. They're going to have to find a new champion this time.
I won a gold medal for when I won a book award. So I am technically a gold medalist winner. So just like Michael Jordan and others, Carl Lewis, I'm a gold medal winner. Becky, are you watching? I want to ask this of both our guests, but I'm curious, are you watching the Olympics?
Of course, America. Yeah, swimming. I love swimming, obviously gymnastics. But yeah, swimming. I grew up in competitive swimming and it's fun, always fun to watch.
I didn't know that. Will, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I wanted to mention is, Becky, I don't know if you know this, but Michael and I go way back to doing radio together, at least 10 years, if not more. Before I was at the DFL, I was at the Flamethrower AM 950 radio, the Progressive Talk. And this is you'll enjoy this. Once I co-hosted, I filled in for the morning show for a whole week. Myself and Aaron Rupar, who you all might know from Twitter.
Yep.
And Michael joined us for an entire episode and we roasted him for the whole morning. It was great. It was a lot of fun.
Wow. He's always liked to go into the belly of the beast. Good job, Michael.
That's right.
Love it.
Our boss hated it when we had him on too. It's so much fun.
I wasn't going to bring that up, but I was hoping you'd add that for flavor.
I have a distinct memory of hearing her march across the floor, like very aggressively to come yell at us. Yeah.
That happens a lot wherever I go.
Yeah. But you've been a great friend, Mike. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you being on. Thanks for doing this. Becky, we just spoke with Will Davis to talk about why Tim Walz would make a fantastic VP pick. Your take.
Will and battled it out a little bit over the last decade or so in our respective positions, but he's a great interview. It was really great to get his take from all of his experience working at the DFL, working obviously with and on behalf of the Walz campaign at different various levels, whether for Congress or governor, and obviously supporting his efforts in the governor's office. So great to get his insight. Love hearing from him in his new position. And yeah, I think for all purposes of what we're seeing and reading, Walz is certainly in the mix. Like you said, he should certainly be in that top three slot. I was a little skeptical when we did our interview last week. I thought he was probably more down the 5, 6, 7 of that list, but it does appear that he's certainly really in the running for being one of the three maybe picks for this position. Well, I did express that I do believe it's going to be Senator Kelly from Arizona. I do see the perks you guys saw for the Harris campaign. Not that it's going to win me over and get me to vote for a Harris Walz ticket, but there is certainly, his background, teacher, veteran. He's got the congressional and the executive experience. The Democrats have some issues up here along the blue wall. We see all of these different things that Walz and his candidacy could bring along with it. Certainly balances out on Kamala Harris, but I do think Walz has some baggage. I do think there is a little bit more to him that he doesn't necessarily maybe get dinged on as much, and he's had some troubles in his few years here as governor with some scandals, but also with the trifecta and some of these more liberal policies that they pushed around. And if he is the choice and Republicans can capitalize on some of that, I don't know that he would be able to pull over a Wisconsin and Michigan to be blue states for them. But he's certainly, like you've expressed and will as well, he's got a good resume and a good story to be in the mix for sure.
I think you're making good points for your side. I would also say to you that I think one of the things I would say to you, what I have seen out of Walz since Harris has ascended to being the nominee, I think is another advantage that Walz has right now. I think that he has been out there on national TV communicating on behalf of Harris and the entire effort right now, that I think he has really showed that he could handle the press scrutiny and that he can handle national interviews and communicating and speaking on behalf of Harris, Democrats in general. So he's shown that he's value added, that he would be a value added addition. And one of the things, independent of Walz, that I will say is that what has happened now that Biden has receded and Harris has become the presumptive nominee now of the party, is that it has really shown, I think, the depth of the bench that the Democrats have. There's been a number of this process that Harris is going through in terms of selecting her VP. The benefit of it that it's giving to the party, I think, is that the people that are in the running, that have names that are being mentioned, are out there on national TV making a very aggressive case for why Harris and the Democratic Party where voters should be at. And they've really, I think, landed some punches on Trump and Vance. And I stand by my position that if Trump could do it over again, that he would have picked somebody else. I know others disagree with that, but I think that where they are right now is not where I think the Trump campaign, the Trump Vance campaign needs to be. I was telling some family yesterday that if the election were held today, I still think the advantage goes to Trump. But I think the Trump Vance campaign needs the election to happen as soon as possible. And the farther we get away from today is giving, I think, Democrats more inertia that they are going to make this, I think, a close race. We already knew it was going to be a close race, but there were certainly some advantages that the Trump campaign had over the previous month or so. We'll see where we're at. But right now, there's a lot of inertia, motion, and enthusiasm on the Democratic side, which we're going to talk about with our next guest soon.
We are excited to welcome back Senator Erin Maye Quade for her second stop at the podcast. Senator, we were just speaking with Will Davis about Walz as a potential VP pick on the short list, maybe amongst the final three in the running there. Obviously, you've spent a lot of time working with Governor Walz with your time at the legislature. What's your take with him being in that short list and in the running? And do you think we should potentially see Vice President Walz?
Listen, he would be the third vice president from the state of Minnesota. So I think we are well equipped to send a vice president to the White House. And I think a lot of times we talk about vice presidents as balancing a ticket or providing certain things. And I think with less than 100 days to the election, the person we need is somebody who can communicate about the future that we have in front of us. And I think that's Tim Walz. So I hope that he's on that short list. I hope he's the pick. And I've signed at least 3 letters saying as such to go to the Harris campaign. So
We've seen a lot of evolution when it comes to the presidential tickets on both sides for over the last couple of weeks, with Republican JD Vance being chosen to join Trump's ticket, which we won't get into today, but I'm sure you have some thoughts on that. As do we. But on the Democratic side, obviously, we've seen just in the last week or two the top of the ticket being changed. And so with Harris coming over, we're seeing, I've been reading a couple of articles over the weekend about the Harris honeymoon, how we have seen that enthusiasm gap that was certainly a problem with Biden at the top of the ticket essentially be closed or eliminated. What is your take? What are you hearing and feeling from voters in your district and friends and family across the state or across the country with that enthusiasm gap, and how Harris being at the top of the ticket is doing for you guys?
I'll tell you, in 2008, I graduated from college and I left Minnesota to go to Colorado to open a field office for then Senator Barack Obama in Colorado. And this today feels like what 2008 felt like. So the Sunday that it happened, after President Biden endorsed Kamala Harris, I had friends that are not political, right? They're not really political people text me like pictures of their donation, right? They're like putting on old t-shirts and sweatshirts, like anything that has to do with something that Kamala Harris touched. I have a constituent in this district. He's a teacher. He like went to a training at Howard many years ago. He like put on a Howard t-shirt. He's a white guy because he was just representing HBCUs. I have never felt energy like this. I was 22 the last time I could come close. And even now I'm seeing people get involved and get activated in ways I just haven't seen in a long time. So that enthusiasm gap I don't even know if it's a honeymoon so much as it is a reinvigoration and participatory democracy that we desperately need in this country. And I'm so glad it's happening right now.
What do you attribute that enthusiasm to? Just give us from the perspective of the race changed, the dynamics changed. Describe what the source is and the energy. Describe where that energy, enthusiasm. What is that about from the perspective of a Democrat?
I think it's twofold. I think the first is that knowing that our current president, President Biden, loves this country so much that he would give up power, it is really affirming, as a Dem, to say we won't follow dear leader off of a cliff, but that we have leaders who recognize realities in front of us and make the right decision. That is incredibly heartwarming. The second is that 2016, the day after the election, there were a lot of people who were very shocked, right, and upset. And even people who voted for Trump didn't think he was going to win. So they thought they were registering displeasure. And the ensuing 4 years were just horrific. And so I think a little bit of what the last month has felt like is we were before an election, but we felt like it was after an election and it felt like we'd already lost. And so like really internalizing what could be, I think brought us to this moment where we have a positive vision for our future and a candidate who can go out and prosecute the case, if you will, energetically and clearly and wonderfully to the country. It just is that we get to fix it before it actually happened. And I think that is where a lot of this joy is coming from. Whereas before we might get mired down and there's not 100% issue fidelity, right, for every candidate. You're never going to find somebody you agree with 100% of the time. I don't even agree with myself 100% of the time, right? I'm my own state senator. And we don't have to go through that. We actually get to say, look, this person is saying, this is what we can be. This is what we're fighting for, right? We're fighting for our freedoms and our rights. We're fighting for a solid middle class, and we're fighting for the freedoms of all people. That is a message we can get on board with. And the details, yes, we'll probably argue over them. The Democratic Party is a very big tent. It's stretching, but that vision is one we can get on board with. And that's what's bringing the enthusiasm. I will say that I think part of President Biden's pitch to America was, look at all the things that I've done. How could you not want me to be back here to do more things that I'll tell you later? Whereas Vice President Harris, I think, is really detailing, here's what I want to do. And that's a little bit of a different message as well that people find it easier to be on board with.
And the polls are certainly showing. We've seen now the first round of polling since Harris has been the nominee. She is outperforming Biden with 9 points with independents, 8 points among voters of color, 6 points among voters 35 and younger. She's polling better with women. There are certainly a lot of things we are seeing by the numbers of folks really embracing and being supportive of Harris as the top of the ticket as the presidential nominee. There obviously, like you said, are about 100 days between now and the election. Do you think that enthusiasm and energy that we're seeing right now following the switch here, is that sustainable for the next 100 days?
Yes, it is. And it's buildable, right? This is actually probably not the ceiling. It might even be the floor because we have our VP pick. So America gets to meet a whole new person who has a record and a vision for our country that's going to be so similar to Vice President Harris that he or she, right? There's one woman that's been in the pool, but he or she joins the ticket, but it's also going to be unique. It's going to be regionally specific. It's going to be life experience specific too. So we get to experience that through one new person. Then we have the convention where you're going to you always get a little bit of a convention bump. It's all about what we want to do and what we're good at. And then there's state fairs. And this is my other pitch for Tim Walz. Like nobody does a state fair better than Minnesota, which means our governor is going to be the best state fair guy. But then you got state fairs and the end of the summer is a little bit of the love fest. And then we go and then voting starts, right? Like I think it's 60 some days till to early voting starts. I really do think that this is like the right length for a campaign. I just want to go on record saying we should shorten campaigning down to 100 days. Like this feels right. But I do think it is sustainable because it's not just relief, it's excitement, right? There would have been relief if it had been somebody else. But what Kamala Harris is bringing is literally like what we need in this moment. It's not just a different person, it's an actual vision and the ability to talk about that. She's actually what we needed. And that's where that joy and that excitement is coming from.
How have Democrats been able to do this? Because, and let me just say, in the interest of disclosure, I have never voted for Trump. I didn't vote for him in 16. I didn't vote for him in 20. We had a discussion, group of, I consider myself to be a homeless Republican, but we had a discussion and all of us were saying the process is tough for Biden to get out. And he got out a week later. How have the Democrats been able to do this? How have they been able to organize, coalesce behind Harris and keep the party together and move with this level of enthusiasm? It's simply astounding.
I think a lot of it is there was not a lot of disagreement about the decision. And so from constituency up
Okay.
to leadership, right? So you had constituents calling their members of Congress, calling their senators, say, look, I'm really concerned. I think Biden should step aside. Then you started having members, including my own member of Congress, Angie Craig, who was one of the first members to really come out and say that she thought that President Biden couldn't win. And so you started seeing that representation. People were trying to have conversations. But what I really think it was, for President Biden, it seems like maybe COVID and time to sit down and get additional information that was coming out into the public more and more. If you think of the Pod Save guys, it sounds like Nancy Pelosi was doing a lot in the background. You had some senators doing it. And so I really think it wasn't about, we don't think we're going to win. It was like, the consequences of not winning are so high and it's so palpable. Like we've already been through 4 years of a Trump presidency. They wrote out Project 2025 for all of us to read. We just cannot continue forward in this way. And I think seeing the difference in President Biden just in the last 6 months that's not the debate guy is not who we got at the State of the Union. And even myself, I was really surprised. And I think we all were thinking, this is the perfect guy to finish out this term, not try to take on another 4 more years.
We chatted a little bit with Will about a woman being at the top of the ticket. And I think that one of the things that we talked about it in the context of what if it could could a woman president and a woman vice president be a ticket? I said that felt like I'm maybe not going to be something that we have quite yet. However, I do think that personally, I believe that the press and the general public saying that, sometimes discounting women candidates, saying that we're not ready for a woman candidate or it's not going to happen. I don't think that's the case. I think that we're primed and ready for a woman candidate, whether that's Kamala Harris or somebody else. But as somebody, you're yourself, obviously a woman elected official, you're a mom to a daughter. What does this mean for you to see your party nominee be a woman, being this close to the finish line, and what does that mean to you?
Everything. There were these t-shirts that used to say that existed that said, "My VP looks like me," right? And about Kamala Harris. And when I was a kid, I used to say, "Oh, mom, I'm gonna be the first female president." And she'd say, "I really hope not. Like, not that you won't be president, but I really hope you're not the first woman. You have a long time between now and 35 or 36." And so I feel like we are so behind. There's so many countries that have had female leaders, so many. And the fact that I'm married to a woman, so I could just say every mom needs a wife, but like, women are keeping all the other stuff running. Like, why can't we run this country? So we're just ready. And I think that Hillary Clinton came with her own unique baggage, but there was some really good deconstructing of the inherent misogyny and sexism that went into some of the things that I think people have had time to sit with. We've had the Me Too movement subsequently. We've seen the elevation of somebody who openly bragged about sexual harassment and assault. I think we've deconstructed enough. Plus, we have a whole generation of young people who've become voters too. And I think that's the part that polls aren't going to be able to catch is just as many people didn't vote in 2020 as did. And so we talk a lot about swing voters and moving people from here to here. Moving non-voters to voters, I think, is the largest opportunity that we have in this election. And it's something that Trump did in 2016 that people didn't see coming. And I think that is the piece that we might not be catching in the numbers right now is how many people are joining in for the first time. They're not going to be called and asked about voting because they've never voted before.
I think that's a really interesting take, and I completely agree. It is wild that we haven't gotten there yet. And I do think I'm the same age as you. I think in the last 10 years in particular, we've really seen this kind of evolution of women being given a little bit closer to the credit that they deserve in leadership positions as CEOs, as good vocal advocates, as that we can lead and we can be smart and intelligent and not cry in corporate meetings. I think that folks have just come around to a different way of looking at women a little bit more equally. And it's sad to even say, but I really do think the last 10, 12 years has really been instrumental. It's really been telling in that viewing of women. And I don't necessarily know that I'm going to be casting my ballot for Kamala Harris. I do think it is something that should be commended and applauded. And at what point it happens, it's about time.
And I think we can't underestimate and underthink Greta Gerwig and America Ferrera because I think the Barbie movie, they had that perfect like little monologue in there that women were sobbing in that movie because they were like, that's it. That's the thing. That's what it feels like. And again, like we've been able to articulate it and say it out loud and talk about how infuriating it can be. And that's why I am not one to say two women can't win. I think if someone's going to vote for one woman, I don't think they've already crossed the barrier, right? So I'm not one to say she should Kamala Harris shouldn't pick Gretchen Whitmer because I think two women can win. Is she the best person for Kamala? I don't know, but I don't think she shouldn't pick her because two women can't win. I think two women can win. I think one woman can win. We've proven men can win. I think we're ready. I do. I definitely think we're ready.
One of the things that is so interesting right now that's going on is this. I think it's this enthusiasm for Kamala Harris is real. I
Mhm.
think that what started as a honeymoon phase is certainly going on much longer, I think, than a honeymoon phase. It's real. I think it's difficult and I think it's challenging right now for Republicans. I do think, as somewhat of a homeless Republican, I would say that I think there's a lot of envy right now by a number of Republicans because I think that I stand by the position that I think a number of Republicans wanted there to be someone else other than Donald Trump, although he did a great job in winning the nomination. Again, I'm not a Trump voter and I'm not voting for him this time around. But it seems that the Democrats have tapped into something which a lot of Americans believed in, is that they wanted a different option. They didn't want it to be a binary choice between Biden and Trump. And I think I think what Democrats are benefiting from right now is that they made a change. For whatever the reason it was, there a change. And the benefit that I think Democrats are going to be able to say is they listen. They listened
Right.
to where people were. And I think that's going to be an advantage on this. And that's what I think part of what's happening right now. I think, as Becky described it correctly, there's always a honeymoon phase when a candidate gets nominated, a VP pick. But what I think is, and I'd like to get your perspective on that, because what I think is fueling some of this, what's prolonging this enthusiasm gap, is that I think she has the potential to tap into people, some of those double haters is what they would call them, as people who didn't like either candidates. I think Harris and the Democrats making this decision is the positive, is it's going to give another opportunity for voters to look at as her as a candidate.
Yeah, I think about people who might lean left or be in the center, but maybe have voted for Biden, don't like Trump, but are staring down the same choice that they had in 2020 and thinking, really, this again? I don't like this. And all of a sudden, you see one of those parties respond to that. How listened do you feel like, okay, not only was that taken into account, what are the other possibilities? And so I think it really, I would imagine for homeless Republicans too, I hope it gives hope about, because I really do. I know a lot of homeless Republicans like you, Michael. I know, I think of the Mitt Romneys of the world, right? They're good people who we might disagree on tax policy or whatever, but we're not trying to hang our political opponents, right? And so I think
Thank you for
I
that. Thank you. I
you're
appreciate it.
absolutely, of course. And I think it's really, I think there are a lot of folks like you, but I do feel for you all because it must be very difficult. And I hope that it's invigorating to say there is a way, right? There is organizing that can be done. I do think that you all can organize your way through this. And I'm hoping that a resounding loss can help rebirth the Republican Party. And I do think some of the folks that you brought in, there's some economic messages that can be adapted, and maybe we can get some like more labor on both sides. I don't think it's all negative, but it will have to be a whole process, and it will require folks like you to be there and to figure out what is at the root of the we want to hang our political opponent stuff, to figure out how can we actually address that through policies that solve the problems in people's lives through a way that doesn't feel like it needs to be violence, whether it's like literal physical violence or economic violence or cultural violence, right? Like we can solve those problems through policy and in community organizing together. They have to happen together. But I do want people to get to a place where they feel like the democratic process is the way to solve those problems.
Obviously, here in Minnesota, we have down ballot tickets that are also up for grabs in the House. Are you hearing anything either from your constituents or your colleagues in the House about what this Harris, and whether it's Walz or Shapiro or whoever joins her on the ticket, about how that's going to affect down ballots? Is there excitement around that, or what's the overall vibe there?
Vibe shift is real. So I've been outdoor knocking. I have colleagues who've been outdoor knocking for their House candidates. And it really is not only on the doors, but at the door knock. So we launched a door knock yesterday and we all just went around and said, like, why are we here? And one guy came, he's like 70. He's like, I haven't been door knocking since 2008. I'm just so excited. I'm ready to talk to my neighbors. And the conversations on the doors are very exciting, very enthusiastic. People are like asking for lawn signs. People are like, I've never had a lawn sign. Can I get a lawn sign? It's just like, it's those little things, but it's happening all over the state. I've had colleagues on the range tell me that they were walking at the grocery store and some woman like stopped her van in the parking lot and was like, I'm ready to get involved, Senator. Like, it's just people are like calling out things. My neighbor across the street texted me and was like, this is so great. And I just met him like 2 months ago. It really is. It's a really exciting time.
My take, and please correct me, and
Yeah.
both of you, please correct me if you think I'm wrong here on this, but my take is that I have said for the last few weeks that if the election were held like literally held today, I'd give a little advantage to Trump.
Mm.
I think Trump Vance need the election to happen today. The
Mm.
longer the election is away, I think this inertia that the Democrats are building is helping them out. And I think that the fact that the election is 99 days away, I think any kind of electoral analysis, it's premature now. But I do think that I think the Democrats have a number of built-in points. They have the convention coming up. I'm sorry, they have the VP pick coming up, which will be an enthusiasm generator. They have the national convention coming up. And then I think what is going to be significant is these debates. And I think
Yeah.
right now the energy and that dynamic has shifted to where I think that this is a real foot race now for the presidency. Do you agree, disagree?
I feel like, yes, I feel like right now it is a close race. I still feel like Kamala Harris is maybe the underdog. You're right. I think if the election were today, I think Trump would have the advantage. I think the 99 days ahead, it really is about building enthusiasm. You can't overlook money helps, right? Like $200 million in a week is not nothing. And for mostly small donors and first time donors, So that just demonstrates enthusiasm on the ground. I also think that any political analysis, and I'd love to see Steve Kornacki get up there and talk about this, about what states might be unlocked that we haven't been thinking of, and what constituencies might be unlocked that we haven't been thinking of. I also think that JD Vance was a really weird pick. It was the pick of a really confident candidate, right? And so I do think, I know you're going to do maybe a different episode about JD Vance, but I think he's a really undynamic speaker who doesn't have really anything to tout as an accomplishment, right? He's been a senator for like about the same amount of time that I've been a senator. I passed more bills than him though. So I just don't know what that brings to the ticket. And at the current moment, it's really drawing it down. And so yeah, I'm not really sure where those next points of enthusiasm are going to come from. Also, JD Vance like way underperformed the Republicans in his state, right? Like he won by 6 points, and that's his
Yes.
Democratic opponent was really great, but I think the governor won by 20 points. So I just don't know. I'm not really sure like what the calculus was there, but it was a weird one.
Yeah.
We love that word weird coming back up. We talked about how Walz was a trailblazer using that. But I don't think we disagree with that. And Michael can speak for himself, but it's been an interesting foray into it. It's not who I thought was going to be chosen. I was hoping for somebody to pull me over the finish line. I was hoping for a Rubio, Haley, Burgum kind of style. Someone like the Walz Kelly that we were talking about previously, a more stable guiding hand in the race, somebody that you can look to and have a little bit more of that comfort and faith that I think Governor Walz or Senator Kelly would bring to the Harris ticket as well. And as you guys both have articulated, I think that the enthusiasm bounce here with the Biden announcement coming so close on the heels of the Republican convention, planned or not, stepped on some of the enthusiasm coming out and the energy from the Republican side of their convention. And now, like you guys have said, we're now waiting for the beat stakes, and then we have the convention, and we're going to have this like in-person energy that we're seeing in other places. We're seeing in the polls, we're seeing on the morning shows, we're seeing across the board on the Democrat side. And we're going to get to the end of August before we potentially see another real bounce on the Republican side for some of that enthusiasm. And I don't want to be a complete pessimist, but right now I feel like it's just going to be a drip of some Oppo coming out on Vance and some continued issues with some statements and more apologies to cats and not women, who are arguably one of the most important voting blocks here that Republicans and Democrats alike are fighting for. And I think we all are in agreement that right now Trump has the advantage. I think that is something that I do think that I see that staying, but I think if it's possible that day after day for the next 100 days, Harris and her VP pick can chip away, and some more unforced errors by Vance and Trump could really erode that lead. Anything can happen. Crazier things have happened, and who knows what is going on in the world anymore.
Oh my gosh, yes. We live in very odd times, right? A week feels like a month. But the thing I will say is that Donald Trump is very old, right? Like he's an old candidate. And so in the minds of voters, I have to assume they're looking at JD Vance not as like a balance out the ticket, but like a real person who could step in should something happen. And something almost did happen, which is horrifying, but I just mean like regular old people stuff happening. And I think that pick lost voters, who didn't bring in voters. I think you're right. Like a Rubio, a Youngkin, a Burgum, a Haley definitely could have been like, okay, but at least they're, when you think about Mike Pence, like there's lots of things I think about Mike Pence, but the thing I think about is that he did his job on January 6th. They tried to kill him for it, but he was the bulwark there. And I'm pretty sure JD Vance was chosen to be not that. And I think what would have helped a lot of people saying, I'm going to vote for Trump, but I know that the number 2 guy, the other guy who is in the room, in the situation room, is a more steady hand. And that's at least some comfort for me. It's not for me, but I could imagine that it would be that for some people. And now the reason why people generally wait to run for higher office when they're new senators is because, yeah, you have a bunch of weird stuff you've done in your life. Get in office and represent your community for a while and say more normal things. And not the more times he focuses on people with or without children, the more times it draws attention to how much he wants to force people to give birth, right? There's just some calculations you make as an elected official about what you do and don't say and where you do and don't say it that he's just not distanced enough from.
My last political question is, what do you think the Harris nomination, independent of what happens on the VP pick, what does that do for the presidential race in Minnesota?
I think I think Minnesota was statistically tied beforehand. I think we can put Minnesota back in with a lot of grassroots organizing and work and the continued work from the Harris campaign, certainly, but Klobuchar and our congressional candidates, our House caucus, and our Senate seat that's up to keep Minnesota the longest voting blue state in the nation. I think we'll retain that record by a pretty healthy margin in 2024. I think what that also means if we send another vice president to the White House or not, what I think that means for Minnesotans is that should Kamala Harris win, the things that we have done in our state to protect Minnesotans' rights remain. And I think that's the concern I hear about a lot is people will say, I'm an independent or I'm not like an always vote this party, but this set of issues, gun violence, reproductive rights, I'm really concerned about that. And I know that I can't just say, oh, I'm concerned about that and then vote for Royce White or I don't know who's running in CD2. Michael, you'll have to dissect this for me. I'm so confused.
It's Joe Tarab, and he's running still, and then it's Angie Craig. It's those two will be the likely two.
Okay. Because there's a Tyler that I see his lawn signs everywhere.
It's such a mess right now.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a mess.
I'll listen to the podcast and see if I can get an explainer. But
Yes. Yes.
I'm not going to vote for, I can't not vote for an Angie Craig because if the Congress stays in Republican hands and they flip the Senate, then we could see a national abortion ban and all that voting that I did for pro-choice candidates in the state, it wouldn't matter, right? And so we're seeing more of that happen here. I do think that people, and I'm in a suburb, right? Like I'm in Apple Valley. I represent a suburban community. Yes, it's a blue suburb, but it's purple, right? People here vote both ways always and really it can shift and swing. And I want to be really cognizant of the fact that most people don't overly identify with a party and they don't overly identify with like party politics. And so being really responsive to people, that is going to be what remains the important thing. And I think that's what a Harris presidency can do is really show people what responsiveness looks like, what actual focusing on the needs of people and not on controlling people and taking power away from people, what that feels like and what that looks like.
Senator, we appreciate you being with us today, and you were the perfect guest to talk about the enthusiasm that's going on inside the Democratic Party. Before we leave, I want to ask you about your enthusiasm about the Olympics. I'm a big Olympic watcher. Becky is too, and I'd like to get what are you watching? What are you rooting for?
Okay, so I watch it all. Like I have it on, I see you have it on in the background. I have it on in the background, like in the morning. I wake up really early to see if I can follow along on the Washington Post Live. And then I watch the recap at night. I think I said this earlier, basically a bald eagle during the Olympics. I love it. I was watching dressage on Saturday. Okay. I was watching it all. And ask one rule about it, couldn't tell you, but it was very dignified. Anyway, and we didn't do very well as a country in it. But so I was a swimmer in high school. So I love watching the swimming, like watching Simone Manuel and Katie Ledecky and just like these incredible husk and the finish where it was essentially two American swimmers that were like within a breath of each other. Just amazing. I watched the fencing. That was so cool. And then gymnastics. Like, how can you not love watching these incredible gymnasts do things that I am still 100% sure are mathematically impossible? If I wasn't seeing it with my own eyes, I would not believe you. But it's just, oh my gosh, what? And I get this like weird pride, like I'm everybody's mom too. Like, oh my gosh, good for them. And they won and they worked so hard. And that's true for all the winners. There's a French swimmer, and I'm gonna blank on his name, who just won and he like just shattered Michael Phelps's last Olympic record. And I'm watching it like crying like I'm his mother and he's not like 12 years younger than me. I'm just so proud of all of them because it's just such a, oh my gosh, what a great thing that we do. And it makes me want to have more things that we come around as a world that promote this kind of sportsmanship and goodwill to each other than the other things we do to each other as the world. But that's probably why I love it so much. Yeah.
I love that. I think it is a really nice, while all the chaos of life continues on around us, it is a nice kind of break where we all can cheer together for the same thing. And it's just fun. It's all these sports that you have no idea. I was watching the high dive the other day of like, how do people get into these things? Like, how do you say, I want to dive 3 stories off and do 14 flips before you hit the water? Is insane to me, and that their parents allow them to do that because that's not going to be allowed in my household. It's wonderful. It's exciting.
Hesley Jordan, who's 16, I was like, okay, so my daughter's 2 and we have this banister and I came around the corner and she was stepping out onto it, like over our staircase, like a balance beam. And I was like, nope, we're not doing that. And it reminded me that there are gymnasts whose parents are like, totally, for the first time, get up on this balance beam and do. And it just, I don't know how they get into it. I think I'm going to avoid finding out based on the experience of the banister. But it is, I don't know how kids get into it. I did read the fencer that just won. It was two American women that were fencing against each other. Anyway, she's the first Black woman to medal in it individually. She got the silver medal. And she was mentored by the first Black man to medal in it individually. I think it was in the 80s he did. And he started this foundation to bring more kids into fencing. And it was her brother that had signed up, and then he didn't want to, so she stayed in it. And that's how she got into fencing. And so you like watch all this, and that's the story. Like one Olympian decided that he was going to help more kids learn how to fence, which I think is one of the I think it might be Hasley Jordan's coach is Nastia Lukin's dad, right? So it is a lot of this like mentoring and finding people like that. So that's what you got to do. Know an Olympian.
I
Go.
I absolutely love the Olympics. I'm watching them nonstop. I'm still convinced that someday I'm going to participate in them. I have no athletic ability. I don't know. I'm hoping tug of war comes back. That's what I need to come back. If tug of war comes back, I might be able to do that. But I don't know. We'll see. But I absolutely love the Olympics, and the enthusiasm around this time every 4 years. I just love it, and I'm glad you were able to. I'm glad you were a fan of the Olympics because it would have been I'm glad we ended on a more enthusiastic note than just talking about what's going on inside the Democratic Party. Thank you so much for joining us today. Okay. And we hope to have you back.
Yeah, thanks for having me and thanks for the good discussion. I'll be thinking of you all into the fall.
Becky, we just spoke with Senator Erin Maye Quade on the enthusiasm inside the Democratic Party right now. That comes on the heels of our interview with Will Davis. How are you feeling right now?
I am feeling good. I'm obviously a little envious of having this being part of a party that's able to coalesce behind a candidate right now and be so jazzed about the Veep stakes and the potential running mate candidates there. I'm a little envious. I'm still really struggling with the presidential ticket myself. But I think that the senator really laid it out really well. There is this huge bounce that Kamala Harris and the Democrats have gotten since she became the nominee. That is something they're going to be able to ride right now for 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks. And that gets us into early voting. And I really think that Trump and Vance have a lot of work to do to make sure that they are not losing ground in these states if they hope to continue to be successful. Obviously, I think that the three of us were in agreement that right now Republican and Trump do have the advantage and the upper hand when it comes to what the map looks like and getting to that 270. But Harris she's definitely surging. People are excited. People are enthusiastic that it's not Biden and that it really does seem to be reinvigorating the base. And when we look at some of those numbers and where Harris has some of those surges with independents, with women, with people of color, some of those places that Trump has seen the advantage over the last couple of years when Biden was his opponent, man, it might really come down to it. What's your thought?
I know that the enthusiasm is real. I think the enthusiasm is real. And here's where I'm at. And as always, just speaking for myself. I did not vote for Trump in 16 or 20. I was not planning on voting for him again. My general approach to voting is something that I've said to you before. I've described in the podcast before is that if I can't vote for the Republican, I believe in a two-party system. I will split ticket and I will vote for Democrats. And so I'm in a very reflective moment right now and really thinking. I would not describe myself as a double hater, although I did express frustration with the state of the race. But as I said, I wouldn't refer to myself as a double hater of both Biden and Trump because I'm not a hater of people. But I haven't voted for Trump. I think there is a lot of people like me out there that I think are looking at what's going on right now and saying that we're frustrated with the state of the race, that it was a Trump and it was Biden, that we had candidates of advanced age, of different abilities from different political standpoints. And so I got a lot of soul searching to do. Happy to discuss it on the race and be transparent about it. Not throwing that expectation on anybody else, but I might do a little soul searching as we go over the course of this race and have some discussions on it, because I'm really struggling with what I'm seeing on the Republican side in terms of the messaging and in terms of some of the where this party is going in terms of on some issues, that I'm just at a point in my life where I feel more comfortable just declaring how I am and how I'm going to vote and be out there. But the enthusiasm from both of our guests, I think, was real. And I think we have tried to do a really good job on this podcast, bringing in voices that we disagree with. You and I have disagreed over the years. We've done this podcast. Our guests, we disagree with our guests. It's very challenging for me for any Republican who listens to that, who sees that, who's going to hear that enthusiasm that we heard from Will and from the senator, and not think it's real.
Absolutely agree. It's going to be a long but short 100 days or so that we have until the November election. Early voting's just around the corner. I'm sure we're going to see more and more polls coming out about what this means, what it means in battleground states, if this is closing the gap, and we'll be here to talk about it.
Thank you, Becky.
I want to thank you for listening to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before we go, show some love for your favorite podcasts by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the platform where you listen. You can also leave a review or give us a shout out on our website or across all social media platforms at BB BreakPod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will return this week with a bonus episode. Thank you for listening.